what happens with PDA children when they get older? Okay, this is a question I get asked a lot in some form or another. For example, will they ever learn to leave the house? Will they ever learn to clean up after themselves? What will happen to them if they continue this type of behavior? Will they grow up to be an abusive spouse or a spouse that doesn't contribute? Will they get married? Will they go to college? Will they ever be independent? Okay, so these are questions that get asked over and over and again in our programs, in our coaching, but also are the same sentences that have passed through my head as a parent of a PDA child as I have been learning to do the work of accommodation, and that still pop up as a parent because it's natural to have these concerns and questions. So if you're joining me here live, or if you're listening to this as a podcast, I'd like to pause for just a second and ask you as the listener to share an emoji or a comment if you have ever had these thoughts of, well, what happens when they grow up if we accommodate them? What happens if we don't correct them in the moment? What happens if we don't explicitly teach them? Okay, so these are very natural questions. So today we're going to be talking about and doing a little mini training on how to see yourself get into this mindset and fear underlying the resistance to doing the work of accommodating your PDA child or teen. Because it is a long-term process, and many of us are not going to see the immediate short-term consequences of taking this a different approach. And so there is a leap of faith and a trust that needs to be brought to bear to this exercise. But I think that for many of you, I want to share today some logic, some experiences, and some stories that if someone had told me this 5 or 6 years ago, it would have saved me so much pain, so much shame, and so much self-doubt. So that's what we're going to do today. But before I do, I want to pause for just a second to let you guys know that our signature paradigm shift program that we run live 3 times a year for 3 months is now open to enrollment for the public. And there are 3 things that make this live program unique, even in contrast to our other pre-recorded offers or to other offers in the PDA space. So the first is that I'm really action-oriented in terms of getting you to take action and change your behavior. Okay, so while we talk a lot on social media and the podcast about PDA itself, the focus of the Paradigm Shift program is actually identifying for each individual parent and family where they're getting stuck and why. So today's theme of what we're going to talk about, this fear, is one of those areas that I can see a parent getting stuck in and can coach them through either in the live sessions or in the moderated community. The second is that it is designed to support your nervous system because this is heavy, difficult work. We're learning to both support and parent a child with a nervous system disability, and moving into radical acceptance of that is extraordinarily triggering and grieving. Not because you don't accept and love your child, but because you're realizing that you have to make trade-offs that you didn't necessarily want to make. Right? And so we do have a nervous system healer, and I have been trained in polyvagal approaches, trauma-informed approaches, so that we can support your nervous system to get through your sticky places in this program. And then finally, an amazing community off of social media, which I know is a wonderful tool that we all have, and I love being here with you all. However, many of us are desiring those connections and spaces off of social media. So back to the task at hand. So the reason I'm thinking about this mini training today is because over the holiday break, my kids were home with me for 17 days. We did go on a trip, but it was the first time our family had not been separated for the Christmas holiday. So this was a big experiment for our family, and it came with successes and also challenges. So as I was making both my sons a smoothie 2 days ago. They were sort of shouting at me like, Mama, we need a smoothie. Mama, I don't like it that way, and sort of ordering me to make it in a certain way. And one of the things they always ask for is for me to pour it through a sieve so that the pulp or like the pieces of the fruit are not in their cups. So many of you, if you have kids with sensory challenges or sensory sensitivities, you're going to understand this description. But as I was making this smoothie, I had one of those fear thoughts or those frustration thoughts that is so common for us as parents, which is like, oh, this is taking so much extra time. I'm making a mess as I'm trying to pour it through the sieve and like put, the spoon down so I can like get this goopy smoothie through this tiny sieve. And like, how annoying is this? So this is running through my head. But then I'm thinking to myself, but wait, they're going to be eating orange juice, strawberries, pineapple, and mangoes. And for my son, who has had a very hard journey with eating, it sort of snapped me back into priorities. But the other thing that was coming up in my head was like, oh, he's never going to learn to just drink a rather regular smoothie. And then I checked myself and I said, well, so what? So what if he never learns to drink a smoothie with pulp in it? Who cares? What are you teaching him, Casey, as you're going through this messy exercise of like getting out the sieve and showing them what you're doing and encouraging them with declarative language by being like, yeah, we can solve that problem. We can definitely do it without pulp. Here we go. Look at me sieving it, right? And so I thought to myself, yeah, I'm not teaching my kids to push through a sensory trigger of like, you have to have the smoothie because I'm not going to take out the pulp for you in this way, which would have likely led to them not having the smoothie at all and not consuming the fruit. But what I am teaching them is something even more important from my perspective. What am I doing? I'm teaching them first and foremost creative problem solving. Why? Because I'm identifying, okay, they're identifying the problem. Pulp in their smoothie, sensory trigger. Okay, I'm responding by, okay, let's get creative. How can we solve this problem? So that's always something that I'm saying in my household instead of like, you do it yourself or we can't do that, right? I'm getting them into the mindset of like, problems can be solved. We're creative. We are resourceful people just like all of you. Second, it's an option to accommodate, okay? It might take a little extra work, but mommy's going to do it. How I'm taking out a sieve, I'm explaining to them what a sieve is. They're seeing where I'm taking it out and they're watching me do it, right? And for many autistic and PDA children, learning by observation is the best way to learn, okay? Even if they're not engaging in the physical activity that first time or even the 10th time, but they are seeing this process. We can solve the problem. Accommodation is an option. How do I go about doing this using declarative language and then modeling it for them? Okay. So this is a very innocuous and small sensory example that is very straightforward, right? And if you're a parent of a PDA child and listening to this in the same space that I was 5 years ago, you would be like, well, Casey, if it was as simple as pulp in a smoothie, I would just do it. But like, I don't know what this kid needs. And like, I don't know why they're having such a big trigger. And when we do need to accommodate, it's things like the perception of autonomy setting off their nervous system. How do we give a 5-year-old autonomy? Or what happens when we lower the demand of like needing to go outside? Right? Are they never going to leave the house? So I use this simple example to illustrate this concept so that we can start to talk more about this underlying fear of they're never going to learn if we don't make them do it. And if we don't make them do it, they'll never grow, be successful, be independent, and have a terrible life, right? Which is where all of our minds go, I think, in this like fear loop that many of us have gotten into. Okay, so I want to carry this logic through to some more triggering or challenging examples that are specific to PDA, but I want to talk to you about how far I've come in my own mindset to illustrate for you that like it's totally normal and okay if at the beginning you're like, WTF, like this is too much, right? So when I first started learning about neurodiversity, we were working in the sensory processing disorder lens, right? And I think that's one of the most low-hanging fruit, sort of easy to digest neurodiversity labels. No offense if you're listening and offended by that, but like I'm sort of making fun of myself because it's like this gateway into more complex neurodivergent identities and neurotypes for many of us. So I first started taking my son to intensive occupational therapy almost 6 years ago. And the first time I had this like trigger was when the occupational therapist started talking about his need, my son's need for heavy lifting and what's called proprioceptive input, meaning he doesn't feel very well where his joints and muscles are, and so he needs that heavy pressure against him to feel where his body is in space. Okay, so feel free to pause and drop an emoji or think about if your child's sensory profile sounds similar. But the first question I had, this is like the first month of OT, I was like, well, what is he going to do when he's older? He can't be in an OT clinic pushing around heavy, I don't know, like crash pads and stuff. And the OT was so patient. She was like, look, like these kids, maybe they do like wrestling or maybe they do weightlifting. They get heavy work in other ways as they become an adult. Okay. And so I was like, oh yeah, okay, I can manage that. I can deal with that. Maybe my kid will need to like do weightlifting, right? Again, just showing you how far away from my mindset and how I accept things I was 5 or 6 years ago, okay? But then we were starting to get into other things, like the fact that my son used a pacifier almost constantly, okay? This is a little bit more than heavy work. And I was like, well, what about the pacifier? He can't just have his pacifier for the rest of his life. Like other people are going to make fun of him, etc. She's like, oh, well, kids who need to orally regulate, they can have jewelry, or maybe like when they're older, they'll chew on the back of their pen or they'll chew gum. Like no bigs, right? But of course, like my anxiety, and I'm like, oh my God, he has a need for oral regulation. So when he's an adult, he's going to be a chain smoker and he's going to die of lung cancer, right? Like this is where our minds go. So I want to illustrate how dramatically my mindset changed as I started to work on radical acceptance and understanding my child's needs and what my priorities were for his learning. Okay, so my son ended up using pacifiers outside of school until he was almost 8. Okay, that's well outside of the normal distribution. However, I said, I am not going to take this away from him. He has a nervous system disability. If this helps him regulate his nervous system, he can literally use pacifiers for the rest of his life. Who cares, right? And now it's like with that out of the box thinking, it's like you think of things like, wait a minute, why is it like so glamorous and cool and even attractive when an adult smokes cigarettes for oral regulation and self-regulation? And that's something that can kill you. I mean, no judgment, but like this is the reality. Versus like how much we would judge an adult autistic PDAer who like in the privacy of their own home needed to use a pacifier for oral regulation. So that's just something I want you to think about and toy with, because these are the like conditioned fears that we associate with like, well, it can't be this way or they can never be a successful adult. Okay, so let's take some more difficult examples that tie us back to, well, what about when they get older? If I accommodate in this way, what happens when they get older? Will they ever, learn, connect, have empathy, etc.? Okay, so I'm going to give you guys 3 examples. One of an accommodation I call diffusion, one of lowering demands, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and then one for meltdowns. Okay, so How I have come to view this is that instead of my responsibility being to mold and teach my son to be a good human, I now see it as he is a good human. My job is to support him to bring down his nervous system and perception of threat so that kid can come out and live his life. Okay? So let me give you an example of something that used to happen all the time. It still happens occasionally. So many of you, I'm sure, if you have a PDA kid or teen, you have experienced them making a mistake, like spilling something, forgetting something, breaking something, not doing something. And when you ask them about it, or when you see that it's been broken or spilled, they blame you for it, right? This is equalizing behavior. So one of the things that my son used to do a lot would be to spill things, and then I would be in a separate room and he would get activated because it's like, oh, all of a sudden I spilled something. There's probably a sensory experience there. There's also that loss of control and autonomy, and like, you know, I'm doing it this way, but all of a sudden I'm wet or I spilled something. And he would call into another room, or if I was sitting across the room, be like, you made me spill, right? It's ridiculous on the surface. Like, objectively, I did not make you spill unless I have telekinetic properties. When this first started happening, what is the mindset that all of us are going to be in? You need to, A, correct him that you didn't do it. B, explain to him what actually happened, and C, make him have a consequence by making him clean it up. Okay? That is like literally 99.9999% of parent, coaches, therapists, educators, peers is going to tell you those steps, okay? And if you don't do it that way, they're going to be like, that's not good parenting. Why? Because you're not teaching him responsibility. You're allowing him to blame others. You're not showing him how he needs to react in these moments, okay? Here's the mindset shift. And of course, that's what I thought in my head too for a very long time. And it takes work to get out of this, even if you do know everything about PDA. It's the underlying resistance that will make you not accommodate, okay? So, what happens now? I recognize the blaming of me is a data point, okay? It's not personal. It's not even a behavior, really. It's what I call the behavioral expression of a disability. It is a nervous system reaction, and for my son, it's fight flight, which turns a little bit aggressive, okay? So in the moment, I'm receiving that. It annoys me, of course. My nervous system might get set off. My tool is to say it's just data. It's data of what part of his brain is he in, okay? So I might have been assuming he was here because things are chugging along. We're going fine. He's in his frontal lobe. He spills. Now he's here, okay? And so I'm like, okay, we're in the survival brain, so I can't use any of my frontal lobe strategies that I've been taught in the gentle parenting space by Janet Lansbury, by all the wonderful parenting experts and gurus who their advice works for most kids, right? But all of a sudden, we're not in the same part of the brain for which that advice was designed, okay? So then I'm like, okay, it's data. He's in his survival brain. I'm choosing, because I have agency, to use the accommodation called diffusion, which means I am going to act in a way, likely by putting myself below him to get him out of his survival brain and back into the thinking brain, okay? So I might say, oops, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that from, across the room. I might bring in humor. I might be like, yeah, mommy can be so clumsy from across the room, and just like diffuse because I'm using humor. I'm letting him be above me temporarily, because remember, what sets off the nervous system is the subconscious perception that I'm above him. So we can preempt that. Huge mindset work there. All of you are listening and all of you are here, right? Wondering, yeah, but if I do that, he's going to think it's appropriate behavior. But it's not coming from the area of the brain where there's control or rational thought around the behavior. So I might say, oops, I bet we can solve this problem, or I got it, no problem, or I'm going to go grab a towel. Okay? So he's going to watch me potentially clean it up, use declarative language, diffuse with humor, okay? And I might not make him do it at all. I won't ask him to apologize in the moment. I won't make him clean it up. I'm not going to get mad at him for blaming me, etc. Okay? So, what does progress look like? And this is why I believe in this approach, not just for my son, but for the thousands of families that I've worked with and that our coaches have worked with. Okay? So now what happens over the course of 5 years? When he spills something, he often doesn't blame me. When he does, it's very short-lived. And usually what he says is exactly the words that I've said in response. Oops, we can solve the problem. Okay? Oops, that happens. I can get a towel, right? And sometimes he'll clean it up, and other times it's too much of a demand and has too much cumulative nervous system activation. And then I clean it up for him. But we are making progress, okay? What would happen if I just made him do it? My son wouldn't comply because he's very externalized, right? Fight, flight reaction. A lot of kids who maybe are gifted and internalized or more of a freeze, fawn, collapse profile are going to comply, and there's going to be a cost to their nervous system that's going to come out later in their basic needs and their behavior. Okay, so it is not a costless thing for these PDA kids, even if we enforce compliance. And frankly, if we just make them clean up in the moment and they have a nervous system response, they will do the thing to stay alive, which is clean up because mom said I had to, and I'm perceiving threat. And so my strategy for survival is fawn or freeze, functional freeze. But I didn't actually learn, right? I just know I had to do that because I'm trying to survive. I have a survival strategy coming from my subconscious. But when I'm an adult and that happens, I might just go into functional freeze because that's my pathway instead of what I hope that my son is learning by the modeling and what I see from the data and what I teach parents to track with their kids, which is oops, I made a mistake. I can clean it up, right? And so it might take a lot longer than enforcing compliance in the moment, but if the question is, what happens to our kids when they get older? What does this look like in adulthood if we accommodate? It's really, really freaking messy on the way there, but we're making progress towards adults who actually are learning to manage their disability and their nervous system. Okay, let's take another example of lower demands that often can bring up this question, right? Which is lowering demands, right? So all of a sudden, this can be on a not superficial, but just on a basic level where it's okay, you don't have to do chores anymore and we're going to cut down on some of your after school activities, all the way to, brushing your kids' teeth for them, needing to wipe their butt for them, bringing their towel to them and actually bathing them, right? And having resistance with that. So you're actually taking on physical demands that, quote, they can physically do. Okay, so there's a broad range of what we understand of as lowering demands. So as you're listening, I'd love for you to just reflect, or if you're here with me live, to drop in the chat, what are some lower demands that you have this trigger around of but if every time they take a shower, I'm getting the towel for them and I'm running up the stairs to get their underwear and shorts and pajamas for bed, and then I'm bringing their toothbrush to them, then what happens when they're an adult and I'm not there, right? So I have that same thought. I absolutely have that same thought. However, because I am so well versed in practice and have worked with so many hundreds of families, I know that the logic works. Okay. So in a particular, I want to caveat this. If you accommodate consistently for a year and your child still can't leave the house or is debilitated in doing anything, then we want to look at anxiety and or OCD or a different approach. Okay? Because we always want to be thinking about what actually helps the kid and how are these approaches affecting my family, not I have to stick with this as a normative right or wrong thing or a philosophy. Okay, so with lowering demands, we're fighting the voice in our head that says if we don't make our kids do anything, then they will never do anything, right? So, this is a big one, and it's one that comes up for me. I think because I have now 5 solid years of doing this and have worked with other families doing this, I have less of this voice, and I'm here to give you that confidence. But yeah, I still deliver food to my son a lot of the time. However, I can see him learning. Okay, I can see him watching me for what needs to be done. I can see him sometimes filling his own glass, and I can see him understanding the concept of needing to lower demands on his specific body because he has a nervous system disability. So what does this look like? For us, yes, he has not started to make his own meals and take out the trash and do chores, but we've created enough of a window with the lowered demands that he can access school, he can access friendships, and he can access football, which is his special interest. Okay? He still has to lower demands on himself around football sometimes. Okay? So I watch him at the end of the week discussing with me, hey mom, it's been a long week. Can we skip teeth brushing at the end of the week? Or I remember a pep rally, my husband's one of the assistant coaches, him saying, my body can't do it, mom. I can't go to this Friday night pep rally. This is an extraordinarily useful skill for grown-ups. Okay? I didn't learn this. I'm still learning this at the age of 43. When I was 26, I was at Columbia University in a master's program in New York City, okay? It was quite rigorous, and I did not know how to appropriately lower demands on myself. I started having severe panic attacks at the age of 26. It was the first time I went voluntarily to a therapist, and one of the first things she said was you're doing too much. You need to sleep. You need to stop trying to do every single thing in this perfectionist type of way, right? It was basically she was teaching me cognitively the skill of lowering demands to manage myself, which is something that my son already understands, and our kids are already learning that we can say no to things and we don't have to show up to everything. And of course, yes, we have jobs and we have responsibilities, but the self-awareness and the knowing that this isn't even an option and being able to say, my body's having a hard time, I'm not going to go out on a Friday night, right? My kid learned that at 8, and I didn't learn it until I had to pay a therapist, and I was in the urgent care on campus being I'm having a heart attack, okay? So these are the data points that I'm we get a lot of flack for not parenting appropriately or not being good parents, but I actually think the skills we're teaching our children, whether or not they have a nervous system disability, but ours do, to actually understand how to manage their nervous system and have some self-awareness around what's going on in their bodies and not just push through things that put them into burnout. I mean, this is a skill set, my friends. Okay, the final example I'm going to use is one that happened 2 days ago, which is meltdowns. Okay, so Meltdowns are something that can be really scary for parents of PDA children and teens, because it's not just like being crying or upset or sharing emotions or like, having a hard time or a quote temper tantrum, although I don't love that word. It is a full-blown panic attack, right? Where if you have an externalizer, you might have screaming, teeth chattering, things being thrown, things being kicked, hopefully not, but there was a time in my family where it would be attacking people, okay? And this is an extreme fight-flight response coming from the subconscious perception of threat. It is not just, I don't want to do this, and so I'm crying. If you have a more internalized expression, this can look like total shutdown. Yeah, I see someone saying loss of bladder control. Okay, so when your body goes into fight or flight specifically, your digestion stops, but your metabolism speeds up and you actually void fluids. So like it's very common to have accidents or vomit, not be able to eat, or defecate or pee. Why? Because if you are an antelope on the savannah and you have to survive with a lion in front of you, which is what their brain is perceiving, even if it's not objectively there, you're going to get rid of all the fluids so that you can run as gracefully and as quickly away as you can, and your body's going to do this without your control. This is what the body does to survive, and our children have a nervous system disability, okay? So, so often the narrative is we need to teach them the skill of holding their pee. Well, actually, none of us have, quote, the skill of not peeing our pants if we're perceiving life threat. Like that's what happens in a nervous system, okay? So all of these narratives about like skill-based learning, of course it's important, but like let's get the context right, okay? Let's get the part of the brain right. Because if not, we're trying to teach our kids not to have a survival response. Okay. So my son, at the end of these 17 days together, where we did not split our family for the first time in 4 years for the Christmas holidays or the holidays, he had a lot of cumulative nervous system activation because he was with his younger brother a lot of the time. And by the end, my husband and I were exhausted and frustrated because it's cold here and there's not a lot to do. My au pair had his girlfriend staying with us for 10 days, so he took some time off. We were trying to get ready for this launch that I mentioned at the beginning of the call, and so my husband and I were at our sort of threshold for co-regulation and coming up with novel ideas. And on the last day of the break, second to last day of the break, we had my dad and stepmom over for our Christmas celebration. And my husband was really frustrated with how much equalizing and how much fighting was going on between the boys. Just constant, like, fighting over, like, what part of the couch they were sitting on and then kicking each other and then, like, one person's foot would like slide over and touch and the other one would freak out. You know the drill. You know what this looks like. And it's like no matter how many times you tell them to stop, it escalates and continues and they fixate on it. So unlike what my husband usually does, there were 2 times where he was like, so they are 6 and 10. So my husband was like, you need to stop or you need to go to your room, which is a traditional response, right? He didn't scream, he didn't throw things, he didn't yell at anyone like in a scary way. It was just a much more compliance-oriented, direct, non-co-regulation approach, right? Because he lost his temper. And my son, my PDA son, he really had a hard time and was up in his room, like rocking back and forth and screaming. And so I went down to de-escalate and sort of validate how hard it was. And then it happened one more time. Okay. But we were both tapped out and depleted, just like you guys are. Okay. So we thought we had gotten through it and we had, I had diffused and de-escalated and provided him a little extra love and care. But he had a full-blown panic attack and was up and down the stairs screaming, throwing things, crying, for probably 30 minutes. It was the biggest meltdown that he has had, or panic attack that he's had, probably in a year and a half. And they don't come that frequently anymore, but this was the big one. And William was scared, and he was, he used to be privy to these meltdowns often, if not daily. And I know encoded in his little body is fear too when he hears those sounds. And he was looking at me like, is Cooper okay? And I was like, yeah, his PDA is here, and he's like, I know. And I was like, we're okay. Daddy's got it. We know what to do. He's going to be okay. And he and I kept reading books and singing songs, and I was like turning on the noise machine to try and sort of drown it out. But like both my subconscious brain and my other sons were like tuning in, hyper vigilant to like what was going on with Cooper. So my husband got this. The service dog was what finally brought his nervous system down. Luckily, we're at a place where he did not hurt himself or anyone else, but the sounds and the movements and the things thrown across the rooms were scary, right? And in these moments of meltdown, this is when also we have that fear of like, well, if I don't like explain to them that they can't do this, or I don't correct this behavior, then they're going to do it when they're an adult, and they're going to like lose their relationships, or they're going to get fired from their jobs, etc., right? But instead of thinking of it like that, how I think of it is he is going to have meltdowns. He's going to have meltdowns as an adult. Like, it's going to happen. My hope for him is that he is self-aware enough of the cumulative nervous system activation that he can do a lot to prevent it with all the modeling that we're doing with the accommodations. And when he does have these moments, it is with self-awareness, and he won't go into the shame spiral or the inability to recognize that this actually isn't the fault of a person with a nervous system disability, okay? So what do we do instead of correcting him, instead of telling him, you can't throw things when you get upset? We heated up a rice bag that he could hold, brought him ice water and a straw. He got settled on the couch with the service dog, and he settled in to watch the Lions football game because we're here in Michigan. And within 3 minutes, he was like, Daddy, I need to go up to bed, because he was so depleted, right? But, we repaired in the sense of like, we brought him care after that episode as if it was like, it's like after someone has like a seizure or a panic attack, like you bring them care. You don't try and change the behavior by correcting it, right? And so every time we do that, we're creating the voice in his head. It's not your fault. It's hard, right? You're going to have nervous system responses, but we can have tools to bring you back down. But this is not who you are. You are not a violent person, right? Yeah, or shame. So, yeah, like my son may not. Okay, so like, for example, I go through this duality of like, maybe my son will need someone to bring him cooked food his entire life. I don't know, right? That's the nature of being a parent with a child with a disability. You can't depend necessarily on like, well, they'll grow out of it, or, they'll eventually not need it. What's paradoxical about PDA is that it's such a fluctuating disability that like I can hold in my heart and head the two possibilities of like, maybe he'll need a caregiver as an adult, and I hope to make enough money to pay for that. Or he might be thriving away at college, totally independent, and like have a business and ball out. Like, I don't know. And I've accepted both paths, because all I can do as a parent, all I have control over, is to teach him how to manage a disability that he has, right? And to do so without shame and self-loathing, and then to build the life around that reality that doesn't make me want to like torch my whole life every morning, which I used to feel that way of like, let's just burn it down. So anyways, I say like, maybe this is a kid, like maybe he's never going to be able to work in a corporate environment with fluorescent lights and reporting to a hierarchical boss with lots of rules because his neurotype doesn't allow for that. But as I say that, it's like if he ever heard that, he would probably have the response of like, well, I have autonomy and I'm above you, so I'm just going to do that, right? We just don't know. And frankly, like not everyone is meant for those environments, and that's okay too. Okay? So I think what I want the key takeaway from this conversation to be is we as parents have a lot of fear and uncertainty. And that is part of both being a parent of a child that like we have an additional layer of disability and neurodivergence. Okay? We also have another layer that's probably there of trauma. But every parent, even if they have neurotypical children, has to confront the reality of like eventually their child's lives are going to evolve in a way that they can't control, right? And so there's a degree of uncertainty. And so how do we navigate that uncertainty? We make choices. We identify our priorities for what we want to teach these kids. And for PDA kids, if we focus on pushing or compliance, there will be a cost to the nervous system. But that doesn't mean we don't have any role to play or any agency. It means we have to shift our energy and focus onto modeling for them how to manage that disability and what the values are of your family. But in order for them to receive that, perceive it, and observe it, they have to be in their thinking brain. Okay, so the task is bringing down the nervous system activation through accommodations consistently over time. Okay, so many parents like you and like me understand PDA. We understand that lowering demands helps our kids, but we get stuck when we're trying to do it because of these fears of, well, what will happen when they grow up? Will they ever be independent? Will they ever have a job or a spouse or friends or go back to school? Right? And so facing that fear and the judgment that comes from others and the self-doubt that you have because of it is the hardest part. That is the task that we're faced with, okay? And that's why I come on here live and share very vulnerable parts of my journey, because it took me years and years and years to get through this, and I still have struggles with my mindset, even though I teach this stuff and I see how well it works with families of PDA kids. So I talked about this at the beginning of the call, but I'm going to drop it in one more time, which is helping you face the fear, judgment, and self-doubt and the underlying triggers and resistance and places that you get stuck in your nervous system and mindset is something we do with an excellent level of expertise here at Peace Parents. I would say my expertise is deep in PDA, but it's deeper in you, in parents on their journey and where they get stuck, because I both lived it and coached it for a long time with families just like you. So if you want more live mentorship and direct support from me and our other coaches, we are currently enrolling our live cohort of the Paradigm Shift program, and we will be doing so either until spots fill or until this Friday, January 10th. So if you would like to join, now is the time. There are links in stories, and you can comment PSP and we will send you the link to enroll. So thank you guys for being here, and I hope it was a useful training episode. We will be keeping it here on Tiles and also turning it into a podcast. Yeah, so Pineapple and Pixie Dust, yes, we do have scholarships each cohort, but we already randomly selected them for this cohort. So if you want to reach out to us at journey@peaceparents.com, we can give you the link to sign up for the scholarship for the next cohort. Okay? So Freeze Out, I see you commenting PSP. So I'm gonna ask that you comment on the tiles so that I see it, because I lose the chat. So any way to access this video for husbands, partners, we're going to have it as a podcast, and I'm going to leave it up as a tile. So often if we're sharing with partners, a podcast, or you can go to YouTube and we'll have it there too, so you could share a link. So hopefully that's helpful. All right, everyone, I hope to see you in our live program, but if not, I will see you here. All right, bye.